What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to break down my way too early 2023 top 5 rookie rankings for the quarterback position, for the wide receiver position, and for the running back position. I would talk tight ends, but there's not a huge number of guys that we're going to talk about at that position group. College football bowl season's kind of in full swing right now. We still got the Natty and a couple other big bowl games, but we want to get as ahead of our league mates as we can, start to diagnose these prospects, start to diagnose the landscape of the position groups now before the NFL draft season begins. Full disclosure as well, during January, during February, March, and April, I'm going to actually sit down, watch the tape, all 22 games on all of these prospects, grade these players, adjust grades based on combine and pro day stuff that we get, and post those tail of the tape videos that I posted last year that you guys seem to really enjoy, documenting my thoughts on each player. This is kind of the first initial reaction, my first top 5 group of positional rankings, and they're always subject to change as new information comes to light. So if you guys enjoy at any point during this video, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Now let's get into it. All right, so a quick reminder that we extended our Underdog Fantasy giveaway, 5 free $50 site credits for anybody who uses the promo code FSE from December 22nd when we started the giveaway. We are going to extend it probably until the end of the NFL regular season. So if you guys want to get in on some playoff best ball, we did a stream yesterday breaking those down, some pick'ems, some battle royales, all that good stuff. And we will have a special promo. If you use our code, you'll get a special boosted pick'em line, which will be active pretty soon as well. Head on over to Underdog Fantasy, use that promo code FSE at sign up and first deposit, 100% back on whatever you put in. Plus, you'll be entered into the contest as well. Like I said, that'll end around week 18 or so, and you'll have tons of cool things that you can do over on Underdog Fantasy if you haven't already taken the leap and joined us over there. So now let's get right into the positional rankings, and we're going to start with the quarterback position. With this position, more than any other, I'm taking into account projected draft capital because it is very, very important for the quarterback position. And our best insight for projected draft capital is stuff we hear from the league, from big scouts for NFL teams. They say, NFL teams prefer this quarterback over that quarterback. They think this guy's a first rounder. They think that guy is going overrated in the media right now. Whatever we hear, we're going to take into account with mock drafts and collect information and then kind of work our way into the quarterback position in the landscape that we're going to talk about. I think this will be the most highly debated topic of the entire 2023 rookie dynasty mock draft season because we're talking about the position that affects us most in super flex leagues and in 2 quarterback formats. If you guys play in 1 quarterback leagues, obviously not quite as relevant, but definitely will shake up boards in super flex and 2 quarterback formats, which is typically what we talk about over here on this channel. So I'm not going to get super analytical, super in-depth into the stats. I went more in-depth on these players a couple weeks ago. If you guys want to check out the video titled Everything You Need to Know About 2023 Rookie Picks, I'll go a little bit more in-depth on that video, but we're just going to briefly go over these top 5 rankings. My quarterback 1 in the class so far is Bryce Young, quarterback from Alabama. He's a pro-ready, complete quarterback prospect. He's recorded a 90.8 PFF passing grade this season, second in the country right now, 27-5 touchdown to interception ratio, 8.4 yards per attempt with a diminished supporting cast of wide receivers from what he had last year when he was the Heisman Trophy winner with Jameson Williams and with John Mechie moving on to the NFL. He's currently plus 125 to be the first pick in the draft to the Houston Texans right now. The issue with him as a fantasy quarterback, as I've kind of already touched on, if you guys have been following the channel throughout the season, is that he's not a Justin Fields, a Jalen Hurts, who's going to rush for 900 yards and 6 touchdowns. He's closer to a Tagovailoa type of projection, who was virtually useless in fantasy his first 2 seasons until he got some weapons, until he got some protection, until he got good coaching around him, which are not a guarantee for young quarterbacks, as we know. If Detroit was picking number 1 in the draft, I would say that, Bryce Young and Bijan Robinson are the clear 101, 102, interchangeable because Detroit has all that stuff, right? They have protection, they have weapons, they have good coaching, but the Texans, they have a lot of work to do, and it's looking like Bryce Young to the Texans is probably what's going to happen in the NFL draft. So it hurts him a little bit, but he is still definitely the best quarterback prospect in the class. Quarterback 2 for me right now is CJ Stroud from Ohio State, another pro-ready prospect with a good passing profile. 84.9 PFF passing grade so far this year because he still does play because they are in the college football playoffs. He plays the University of Georgia on New Year's, which will likely make or break some people's opinion of him because Georgia's a great defense. 37-6 touchdown interception ratio, 9.4 yards per attempt. He is currently plus 200 to be the number 1 pick in the draft. So again, very high projected draft capital according to Vegas. It's likely secure with him. We don't really have to worry about where he's going to go in the NFL draft. This one is the one I wrestle with because CJ Stroud, relative to the guys I'm going to talk about in a second, is more of a floor play. And philosophically, for me at least, I've noticed the best plays in Dynasty when you're going after the quarterback position is to not draft floor plays, because there is no such thing as a floor play at the quarterback position, because it's a very volatile position group. People miss on quarterbacks left, right, and center. Just look at, the Jets, who haven't had a quarterback worth a damn since Joe Namath. It's a very hard position to get right. So if you're going to go after a quarterback, you better be certain that that guy has the ability to really appreciate and value, really be a great fantasy option. So my policy is, if I'm going down swinging for a potentially elite dynasty quarterback option. And due to CJ Stroud's lack of mobility, a guy that's not going to provide really anything on the ground as far as rushing is concerned, he's even more dependent on surrounding talent, on protection, on weapons and coaching and all that kind of stuff. So his ceiling to me is like a third round startup pick as a result, versus the guys I'm going to talk about in a second, who even without some of those, weapons and protection and coaching, they can definitely get up there in terms of their value accumulation as early as their rookie seasons. And that the first example of that is my quarterback 3, which is Anthony Richardson, quarterback from Florida. He is the polar opposite side of the coin. He is not at all a floor play. He is a boomer bust prospect, as big as I've ever seen. He's not pro ready. He's not all that consistent. He didn't have that great of production this past year. He's basically the SEC version of Malik Willis last year. He ranked 70th in the NCAA in PFF passing grade with 70.5. A 53% completion percentage, which is not good at all, 17-9 touchdown interception ratio. But NFL teams look at the film with Anthony Richardson. They see the wow throws. They see the athleticism. If the kid's got a working brain and he's good on a whiteboard and he works hard and he can be coached up, then NFL teams are going to fall in love with Anthony Richardson. And they're going to think, the egos of NFL coaches are going to think, hey, I can turn this kid into the next Jalen Hurts, the next Justin Fields, the next Josh Allen, a developmental quarterback that eventually works out. AR-15 is one of the only quarterbacks in this class, in my opinion, that can ascend to a top 5 to 8 startup pick this time next year, this time in the next 2 years after his rookie season, because of the tools that he brings to the table. 6'4", 240 pounds with a cannon for an arm, reportedly runs like a 4.3 40, just absolutely elite athleticism all around. Just look at the best teams in the NFL right now. If you don't think that this is a copycat league and you think that Anthony Richardson is not going to draw comparisons to Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, these guys that are starting to really, really establish themselves as threats at the quarterback position, this is the new prototype in today's NFL. And if he goes round 1, I will take a swing for the fences on him as the QB1 or the QB2 in this NFL draft class. Quarterback 4 for me is Will Levis from Kentucky. And again, another very toolsy type of quarterback with suboptimal production, a guy that is still in the SEC, so you definitely get to see that high-level competition against him. But 65.8 PFF passing grade, 19-8 touchdown interception ratio, 65% completion percentage this year. If you ask me, I think the reason that he wasn't as good this year is because he wasn't running as much as he was last year in 2021. He ran 516 yards and 9 touchdowns in 2021. In 13 games versus 112 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns this year. Plus, he also lost his best receiver with Wan'Dale Robinson, the current Giants second rounder from last year's draft. NFL scouts continue to say this, though, and this is why I have Levis ranked pretty high in my overall rookie rankings and in my quarterback rankings in general, because even though, he may not look like a first-round quarterback prospect, he is going to go round 1. Everything we've heard from NFL scouts is that the NFL believes he's a first-round quarterback prospect. Teams are in need of quarterbacks, teams like the Colts and the Panthers and all these other teams, which means that if they believe he's a first-round quarterback prospect, and first-round quarterbacks are always valuable in dynasty rookie drafts, Mel Kiper currently has the guy as the quarterback 1 in the class, who's very connected to the league. He knows what NFL teams are thinking. He knows what NFL teams are saying about players. And if he had him as quarterback 1 based on the tape that he's watched, and he went to the teams and they were like, oh, no, that's a day 3 prospect, then he would probably lower him down in his rankings. But he's going to NFL teams and they're saying, hey, yeah, we think Will Levis might be the best quarterback prospect in the draft as well. You are very warranted at having him quarterback 1. And I think it's also been reported many times that most people in the league prefer him to CJ Stroud as well. So NFL teams are not drafting the best college quarterbacks. They're drafting the prospects with the blueprint and the best ability to become studs in the NFL once they develop. So guys like Levis, who are 6'3", 230 pounds, have great arms. They can run. He's an older prospect, so he's probably going to do very well on the whiteboard. He's probably going to wow scouts in interviews because he's going to be more mature than other prospects as well. Even if you hate him as a player, use a first-round quarterback like Will Levis to trade down, to leverage that into other picks, to trade that pick for a veteran. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make in Dynasty is they get so attached basically to their opinions of players that they don't allow themselves to exploit the market. If the market believes that Will Levis is a first-round quarterback and he's going to go as a top 10 rookie pick, then use that as leverage. Don't take him if you don't like him, but use that as leverage to trade off that pick, trade down to a player that you do like, and get some value on top of it. So people forget that it's good to have highly drafted players in rookie drafts because it pushes down players that we do like. So quarterback 5, closing out the top 5 QBs for me, is Hendon Hooker, quarterback from the Tennessee Volunteers. Hendon Hooker probably would have been my QB 6 behind KJ Jefferson from Arkansas, but KJ Jefferson actually went back to school. So Hendon Hooker, my QB 5, had a breakout season this past year. He's an older prospect as well. He's about 24 years old, 85.2 PFF passing grade, 27-2 touchdown to interception ratio, 9.5 yards per attempt. Torn ACL at the end of November is no bueno for his draft stock, especially when we consider draft capital, which is the most important input for the quarterback position, because it's probably going to mean that he hears his name being called outside of the first round, maybe even outside the second or third round, sliding to day 3. I really don't care to break down his game much until I see where he gets drafted in the NFL draft, or when we start hearing things about where he might get drafted in the NFL draft, because given the improvement he showed this year, he's definitely an interesting prospect, but not a guy that I think is going to go in the first round, especially now that with the injury. If he had not gotten injured, then we might be talking about a different situation, but the injury is going to cause him to drop in the draft a little bit. So the wide receiver position, again, we're going to go over my top 5 wide receivers. I'm not really talking about these guys in relation to where I'm going to take them in a rookie draft. I did a Dynasty rookie mock just last week if you want to check that out. But the wide receiver class actually had a very big development yesterday because LSU's Kayshon Boutte decided against returning to LSU. So initially, he decided, I'm not going to declare for the NFL draft. I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to come out as a senior from LSU. Instead, he's like, you know what? Screw it. I'm coming out for the NFL draft. He probably talked to his agent or the NFL draft committee and they said, hey, dude, if you come out for the draft, you're going to be a first or a second round pick. And he was like, oh, why would I stay for another year of school? Definitely makes some sense. So he's definitely going to hear his name called in these top 5 rankings. Wide receiver 1, though, for me in this draft class has always been and still is Jordan Addison, wide receiver from the USC Trojans, 24th in the NCAA this year with a 82.4 PFF receiving grade. He's played in 10 full games this year because he's been dealing with ankle injuries from week 7 on. Averaged 87.3 yards per game, 0.8 touchdowns per game, 23% target share, working with Caleb Williams over there, the Heisman Trophy winner. Guy just passes the eye test for me. When you watch him, he's a great receiver. He's a natural separator. He looks a lot like, on the very, very high end range of outcomes, like a potential Justin Jefferson type of prospect, a Chris Olave, a Garrett Wilson, a Devontae Smith, somebody like that. 3-level threat who can burn you deep, highly productive. He won the Biletnikoff Award with a monster season at the University of Pittsburgh before he transferred to USC last year. And with Kenny Pickett, he pretty much made him look like a first-round quarterback, in my opinion. He made him the quarterback that got drafted 24th overall to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I have very few concerns for Jordan Addison other than really size, because he's 6 foot, 175 pounds listed. He looks pretty slender. He looks kind of like Devontae Smith looked coming out of Alabama. But Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson were both like 6 foot, 180 pounds coming out of Ohio State last year, and nobody seemed to care about their size. So I think if he can get up to 180, then it won't be a concern whatsoever. So wide receiver 1 for me, Jordan Addison, like I said. Wide receiver 2 for me is Jackson Smith-Njigba. He did absolutely squat this year, dealing with hamstring injuries, pretty much marred his entire season. He will have question marks from NFL teams because he wasn't able to play this year. Now that Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave are in the NFL, people wanted to know, can Jackson Smith-Njigba play on the outside? Was he a product of Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave drawing attention away from him? And that's why he was so productive. Because if we think back to the LSU Tigers a couple years ago, Terrace Marshall was very productive alongside Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, who were obviously studs in the NFL, studs in college, just like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, studs in the NFL, studs in college. To me, I think the concerns are a little bit overrated with Jackson Smith-Njigba. I don't really care that he was a slot receiver working against easier corners. I don't really care that he dealt with injuries all year and we didn't get to see that final year of production. It's almost the exact blueprint of Jamar Chase in his draft eligible seasons. The only difference is that Jamar Chase just opted out of the year versus JSN, who got hurt week 1 and pretty much was marred with injuries. You guys can see on the screen right now that when all 3 of those Ohio State wide receivers were on the field together, Jackson Smith-Njigba and Garrett Wilson were pretty much tied in terms of market share of the team's passing yards when they were all on the field together. And of course, when they were not on the field with Jackson Smith-Njigba in that bowl game, he went absolutely berserk. So to me, he fits the mold of the PPR stud in fantasy football, right? We know that, the days of the 6'4", 250 pound or 230 pound beast is definitely ideal. Like we want those Julio Jones, those type of prospects, but Jackson Smith-Njigba can be the next, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the next Cooper Kupp, the next Chris Godwin type who's just going to heave targets and be a PPR monster. So to me, Jackson Smith-Njigba, one of the most over-scrutinized wide receivers in the process so far, and I think it's going to continue that way, unfortunately, but he is my wide receiver 2 right now. Wide receiver 3 is Quentin Johnston. And again, he fits the description of the alpha size. He's 6'4", 215, 220-pound wide receiver. He still has a game or two to go left versus Michigan and maybe the national championship if they're able to beat the Michigan Wolverines on New Year's. But Quentin Johnston, the reason I have him at 3 and not at 1 or 2, which I think a lot of people will, is because he only has a 21% target share this year, and he hasn't really exceeded that throughout his collegiate career. I'm a little worried about his profile, though, because not that he plays for TCU and I'm helmet scouting because of Jalen Reagor and Josh Doxson. The reason I'm worried about him is because his PFF receiving grade on the season is 77.1, which is like 60th in the NCAA. And I did some digging, and basically he had a couple games where he had a massive, PFF receiving grade, massive production against Kansas and against Oklahoma State. He had 400 combined yards and a bunch of touchdowns in those games. Those were the only 2 games this year where he had a PFF receiving grade above 70. In the other games, he was more inconsistent. He wasn't able to get open as consistently. And on your routes, that kind of results in a George Pickens type of comparison. And George Pickens is a fine receiver and he's a good NFL player, but they're going to have their games and their big catches, and they're also going to have their games where they disappear and they're not getting a lot of targets. And I don't want that for my wide receiver 1 or my wide receiver 2. I want the guy that gets 150, 180 targets on an NFL season. And I just have more doubts about Quentin Johnston being able to do that at the next level than I do about JSN and that I do about Jordan Addison versus, how much is a guy like George Pickens going to help your fantasy team versus a guy like Chris Olave or even a guy like Jahan Dotson who gets open more consistently than a guy like George Pickens. So he's going to go high. He's going to test well. I think the NFL is really going to covet him. So he's absolutely worth a mid first round pick, late first round pick in 2023. But Quentin Johnston to me has a little bit more question marks than I think people are willing to realize. So that's why I have him at wide receiver 3 right now. Wide receiver 4 for me is Josh Downs. In my opinion, just this year's Jahan Dotson. Productive as hell, consistent, and nobody cares because he's 5'10". And that's the only problem with his profile right now. He's 5'10", but 180 pounds. 86.5 PFF receiving grade this year, which is 5th in the country, 1,029 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns on 116 targets this year with Drake May, 27% target share, right? Very impressive junior season, except even last year, he was even more productive. 101 catches, 1,335 yards, 8 touchdowns as a true sophomore last year with Sam Howell as his quarterback on 144 targets and a 38% target share. So Josh Downs, very productive the last 2 years, a lot like Elijah Moore, his profile, right? Size was a concern, but very, very productive, produced alongside NFL talent. Unlike Jahan Dotson, this profile is also 3 years, right? He's an early declare if he comes out this year. He comes out at 21 years old, much safer prospect, in my opinion, than Kayshon Boutte, who is my wide receiver 5 as of right now. Wide receiver 5, Kayshon Boutte, still very young, which is definitely a plus in his category. He's 20.6 years old as of right now. He had a 3-game stretch with 527 yards and 4 touchdowns with over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns against Ole Miss as an 18-year-old true freshman. So a lot of people are holding on to that with Kayshon Boutte, but he then averaged 8.3 targets, 84.8 yards, 1.5 touchdowns per game as a sophomore, and then got injured. So he was very good freshman and sophomore year, and then had a lackluster year this past year in 2022, dealing with a mobile quarterback in Jaden Daniels. It's unfortunate that we never got to see that eruption, that explosion year for a full season out of Kayshon Boutte, because he could have very well been the wide receiver 1 in this class if we did see that. If you guys think back to that video I did back in I think it was May, wide receivers to target and avoid in your rookie drafts, I talked about the biggest red flags of some of these prospects that never ended up working out being that they weren't progressing as players. And that's a red flag in these prospects profiles when you have a 64.9 PFF receiving grade in your junior season after being productive as a freshman and as a sophomore. 538 yards, only 2 touchdowns this year. But the bright side is that he still did have a 23% target share, had over 100 yards and a touchdown against the vaunted Georgia defense, the best defense in college football. I truly can't give an educated take on Kayshon Boutte until I watch his film. That's really all it comes down to for me, because there's so much wrong with his profile and so many kind of things that you have to piece together that I can't say, this is the wide receiver 1 in the class until I see why, he didn't get the production this year. I need to watch his film to be able to see that. To me, he's still like a 1-2 turn caliber prospect in rookie drafts, 1-2 turn caliber NFL draft prospect as well. I expect him to go in the top 2 rounds of the NFL draft, given the value that we give to wide receivers, and he'll probably test pretty well as well. So definitely a guy that I'm interested in, but wide receiver 5 for me in the class. So running back position, and then we'll close this thing out. RB1 in the class is obviously Bijan Robinson from Texas. I'm honestly kind of sick of talking about him already. He's the 101 in the class. If you don't know why, check out the other vids that I've done on him. Bijan Robinson also finished the year with the highest PFF rushing grade in the entire country, 96.0, which is absolutely stupid. It is the highest of the PFF college era, which dates back to 2014, beating Javonte Williams in 2020, which was the previous high of 95.9. So this is a complete 3-down back. He can kill you as a receiver. He's fast. He's big. Over 1,800 yards and 20 touchdowns in a split backfield on less than 300 touches for Texas this year, which is dumb as fuck. If he had, 350, 400 touches like he probably should have gotten for Texas, he would have won the Heisman Trophy. I have no doubt in my mind that would have happened, but Texas has other talented backs on the roster. They wanted to keep him fresh, all that kind of stuff. So moving on to Bijan, you guys know he's RB1. RB2 is a battle for me. I've been kind of talking about this back and forth throughout the season. I'm caught between Sean Tucker from Syracuse and Jahmyr Gibbs from Alabama as my RB2. For now, I'm leaving Sean Tucker from Syracuse as my RB2. The reason it's a battle is because both guys have a major question mark about them, and Alabama's Jahmyr Gibbs scares me a little bit more than Sean Tucker's question mark about him, because Gibbs is a very good prospect, but he has one major question mark, and it's his size. Tucker's question mark is that he currently isn't being mock drafted very high. I don't know what his draft capital is going to end up being, but for the reason I'm more willing to stomach that with Sean Tucker is because I have faith that his draft stock is going to rise as the process goes along, because he's a former track star. He's probably going to test very well. He has good size, and I think once people get into the tape, they're going to realize that this is a great running back prospect, a day 2 caliber running back prospect, probably a guy that deserves to hear his name called in the top 50 of the NFL draft. NFL teams will love him once they get his tape going. 1,300 total yards this year, 12 touchdowns with a staggering 52 targets as a bigger back, 36 receptions, and an 84.0 PFF rushing grade. He's not an elite receiving back on efficiency, but he definitely was there from a target perspective. He was over 15% target share this year, which is a ludicrous number for a running back. Commanding targets is important, right? Whether you're an elite receiving back once you get the ball in your hands or not is a separate discussion, but the ability to command targets is definitely important. Like I said, he has track speed. He was a track high school athlete. Workhorse size, 21 years old, is a combination of boxes that I'm willing to bet on. So, like I said, RB3, but basically like RB2B for me is Jahmyr Gibbs. How much does the dude weigh? That is really all I care about at this point in time. I am not drafting a 195-pound running back in the top 4 of a rookie draft. I'm just not going to do it. I'm probably not even going to do it if he's 200 pounds. But if he clears, 205 to like close to 210, he'll be my RB2 in this class, no questions asked. But he's also 5'11", so the BMI is going to be a concern for him. He needs to bulk up a little bit. He needs to get a little bit bigger, because the other reason why his size matters is because he was never a workhorse running back at Georgia Tech for 2 years before he transferred to Alabama. And then once he got to Alabama, of course, we know that they're not going to give anybody a workhorse role. But even knowing that he wasn't a workhorse at a school like Georgia Tech is definitely concerning. It makes me think that his size is a concern. He's a 3-down guy. He has the ability to be a 3-down guy. He's explosive. He had 50 targets this year on his own with a top 8 PFF receiving grade in the country. A lot of tread on the tires still, obviously, but probably not a great bet for workhorse volume. He's very similar profile to a guy like Alvin Kamara, to a guy like DeAndre Swift a few years ago. So definitely a great prospect, but still some concerns. RB4 in the class for me, this is a bit of a shakeup. I have Zach Charbonnet from UCLA here at RB4. I had Zach Evans RB4 for a while from Ole Miss, but to be honest, I like the way that Charbonnet's profile is shaping up a lot more than Zach Evans. And also, I've watched a little bit of UCLA and I've seen this guy play. Yeah, he's a senior, and that's definitely not ideal. I think he should have came out in last year's class. He probably would have been the clear RB3 for me behind Kenneth Walker and Breece Hall, who were the clear top 2 guys. But a guy like Zach Evans, who's a junior, and a guy like Zach Charbonnet, who's a senior, they're literally like 4 months apart in age. He's barely 22 years old, so age is not really a concern for him. Charbonnet recorded the 5th highest PFF rushing grade in the PFF college era with 93.6 this year. So we're talking about a guy who's been the 5th highest graded runner since 2014, according to PFF, 27% tackles avoided per attempt, 77.1 PFF receiving grade this year as a bigger back, 44 targets, 37 receptions on the year, 6'1", 220 pounds, size, good speed. He broke off 44 10-plus yard runs this year on only 194 carries. He's very elusive. He's got the contact balance that you look for. He's a pretty complete back, in my opinion. I think this is a stone cold lock, 2nd-round pick type of guy in the NFL draft, and I think this is going to be a great value for those of you guys that have early 2nd-rounders, because I think that's where you're going to get him in rookie drafts this year. So closing out my top 5 quarterbacks, wide receivers, and now running backs, we have a tie at running back 5, just because I wanted to talk about both guys. Blake Corum and Zach Evans. Like I said, these guys are closing out my top 5 running backs. Corum and Evans are pretty much neck and neck for me right now. If Blake Corum was 100% and he didn't just have knee surgery on his meniscus, he'd actually probably be ahead of Zach Evans right now. But he did actually have surgery on December 1st. It's not an ACL tear, so we're not overly concerned about the 9 to 12 month recovery timeline, but it will cause him to be rehabbing probably early in the draft process, maybe for another month or two or so. And I'm sure teams are going to want to see his medicals in Indianapolis at the combine. He's a great prospect, though. Blake Corum, running back from Michigan, 5'8", 210 pounds, well-built guy, third highest PFF rushing grade of all time in the PFF college era. Like I said, 95.8, just behind Bijan Robinson this past year, 4nd in the country, 1,500 total yards, 19 total touchdowns in just 11 healthy games this year. He was on track to potentially be a Heisman frontrunner, and he had to share the receiving role with Donovan Edwards, so he doesn't have the greatest receiving profile, but he had a solid 24 catches in 2021 while he was still the lead back there as well. So even only 11 catches this year, splitting the backfield, you can see that he has receiving ability. It's not a problem for him. And then Zach Evans, who is like my other RB5, my RB5B, doesn't have a ton of work under his belt. 3 years of college, only 290 carries total. He played 2 years at TCU. He came in there as a 5-star true freshman, wasn't able to command that much work, but he was very efficient. Same goes for his sophomore year. He then transfers to Ole Miss, and unfortunately for him, he runs into the SEC Freshman of the Year with Quinshon Judkins, who's probably going to hear his name called very, very highly in Dynasty rookie drafts in 2025, and he was just outstanding. So they split the backfield there at Ole Miss this year. Career 6.9 yards per carry for Zach Evans. He's been very efficient on his touches, 10.8 yards per route or reception as well. But we really don't know how good this guy is on a full workload or if he can even handle a full workload. He's kind of another guy like Kayshon Boutte that I really just have to watch the film on and make my distinctions at that point in time. So let me know what you guys thought of my rankings. Who did I miss? I didn't talk about Tank Bigsby at running back. He'd probably be like the next guy that I would talk about. At wide receiver, I didn't talk about Jalen Hyatt again. He'd probably be like the next guy I would talk about. But we will continue to hash out this rookie class, talk about these prospects as we get further into the draft cycle. But as always, if you guys enjoyed, leave a like, comment down below any of your thoughts, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Check out the giveaway in the pinned comment down below. But with that being said, peace out. We'll talk to you soon.
Why you need the money?